Hello. Well, we're going to go back into the book of John again today, and we're going to go into chapter 2. And as I was just thinking about putting this lesson together, I had a thought that I have often, which is, some of us refer to ourselves as Christians, and we want to model ourselves after Christ. And some of us refer to ourselves as Christians, and I get the impression that these people, even though they refer to themselves as Christians, they really don't want to model themselves after Christ. My mind just went to Romans chapter 7, where it talks about where we do things that we don't want to do. But some of us do things and we don't even see a problem with doing them. Well, in chapter 2, these first 12 verses, we're going to get into the issue of where Jesus turned the water into wine. But what I want to do first, though, I just want to read one verse out of chapter 1 of John, and that's John 1:18, where it says, "No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him." Well, how do we know in terms of how Jesus explained him without delving into the scripture? If it's based upon emotions only, I'll be honest with you. I'm torn as to whether I should even be doing these videos or not. But there's something in me that says, hey, that I need to go ahead and do it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. One of the things as I've been teaching is that regardless of what we believe and what we say, there is no human being, I would care to say, that doesn't think about ethics and morality at some point in time in their life. People are currently grappling with right now who to vote for in this upcoming election. The primaries are going on right now, and the Democrats have several choices that they could make, and they're wondering who to vote for. And the Republican staunch, there's the staunch Republicans are standing behind Trump, and the Democrats are saying anybody but Trump. And you look at it and you think, what's the right thing to do? Well, as I said earlier, we're going to be talking about wine. And I've heard various things, we should drink wine or alcoholic beverage, and some say that we shouldn't. Well, let's get into it. I'm going to read the first 12 verses of chapter 2. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. Now, let's go in and look at what we just read in some depth. On this first verse, the third day, this is 2 days after Jesus' encounter with Nathanael in the last verse. There's some disagreement on that, but if you read what we read in the last chapter, John 1:43 to 51, you'll look and you'll see, and I happen to believe that it's 2 days after that encounter. So that's the third day. And now, in verse 2, where it says, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding, one of the things that, and we talked about it, I think, briefly in some of the previous lessons, this is when Jesus is just beginning to call his disciples. So, again, as I look at this and think about it, I'm thinking that when it says that the disciples were invited, that it's not referring to all 12, but to those that had become his disciples at this time. In verse 3, I am going to read, let me go ahead and read verse 3 shortly, and let me go ahead and read verse 3, and we'll comment on the wine piece shortly, where it says, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Now I'm going to read a couple of verses from a book that's known as Tobit. And I have up here, how did we get our Bible? And is it the Word of God? And how to read a book. You talk about, mentioned reading at the analytical and syntopical level. So some of you may be thinking, well, what are you talking about? This book called Tobit. Well, if you're a Catholic, you probably know the book of Tobit well. It's an apocryphal book. The Protestants don't include Tobit in their canon. That's another issue, but I'm just going to read a couple verses from Tobit. I'm going to read from Tobit chapter 8, verse 19. After this, he gave a wedding feast for them which lasted 14 days. And I'm going to read Tobit 11, 18 to 19. Let me go over here in the book of Tobit. 11, 18. Ahakar and his nephew Nadab came. This to a wedding feast. Again, we're talking about weddings. And Tobias' marriage was celebrated for 7 days with great festivities. So now as we go back over here to this book of John, what I wanted to show you is that weddings didn't last a day. They lasted anywhere from 2 to 1 to 2 weeks, from 7 to 14 days. Some of them maybe even longer. So back in verse 3, the wine ran out. They may have been there for some time. They have been there for some time and ran out of wine. Now, I had mentioned in I think the first lesson in this series, I talked about a man by the name of Irenaeus. And I mentioned that Irenaeus is one of the people that we look to help us know that John wrote this book of John. And what I'm saying, I'd say it that sometimes I feel a little bit reluctant, because I get a sense that most Christians don't want to go into the detail. They want to rely upon emotions only, or primarily upon emotions. And the thing is that I recognize that we all have different gifts, but does your pastor talk about Irenaeus? Or have he ever mentioned any of the apocryphal books? And do you care? Well, I can't not mention these. I mean, they're out there. We're living in the real world. We're living in the real world, and there are some people that you may run into, and maybe they've read. Much of what I've learned, I'm learning from the secular world as opposed to learning it in church. Now, verse 4, and Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." Well, some people comment, in the way he addressed his mother as woman. I know I've never referred to my mother as woman, and I've never heard anybody refer to their mother as woman. But you've got to realize that in 21st century America, coming out of the 20th century, we're in a different culture. One thing that I can say is that Jesus did not in any way show any disrespect for his mother. We must take into account the cultural differences. But now let's talk about his hour had not yet come. And we're going to go ahead a couple chapters in the book of John. And I'm going to read John 7, 6 to 8. So Jesus said to them, "My time is not yet here, but your time is always opportune." Your time is always opportune. Oh, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its deeds are evil. Now, when we get to chapter 7, I'm going to really try to go into the world cannot hate you. I mean, if you're professing Christ, why can it not hate you? Go up to the feast yourselves. I do not go up to the feast because my time has not yet fully come. God is working out his plan in his time, on his timetable. Let's read a couple more. Let's read John 7:30, this same chapter here. And again, we're going to be talking about time. So they were seeking to seize him, and no man laid his hand on him because his hour had not yet come. It wasn't time. Again, God is working out his plan to his time. Let's read one more that talks about time. And all of these are in this book of John, which we're studying now. And this is John 8:20. I'm sorry. Here, let me get over here. It didn't jump. John 8. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, and no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. So God is in everything, and I'm talking to myself as we get impatient, waiting for God to do what it is that we want him to do. He's going to do it within his time, and his hour had not yet come. So let's go back to John chapter 2, and let's read 5 down to 8. His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. You know, they set up their own customs of washing and, you know, and how to do things in terms of how they felt that they should clean themselves up. So there were 6 stone pots there. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim, and he said to them, "Draw some water out and take it to the head waiter." So they took it to the head waiter. Now, in verse 9, this is where I'm really going to do some concentration on the wine. So let's read it. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called to the bridegroom. Now, let's go over and let's try to really break this thing of wine down. And I'm going to read out of Luke chapter 1, verse 15. For he, and this is referring to John the Baptist. This is when the angel had come to John's parents, and you know, he'd come to them, and it says, "For he, John the Baptist, would be great in the sight of the Lord, and he will drink no wine or liquor, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit while yet in his mother's womb." Now, that word for wine is oinos. Let me have the computer pronounce it.
Oinos.
Oinos. And this word occurs 34 times in the New Testament. And when the computer counts it, sometimes the word may occur multiple times in the same verse. So it's counting that as multiple times. But 34 times in the New Testament. And as I looked at this, again, I guess dealing with manuscripts, the NASB has 34 times. I think one or two of the other manuscripts had like 33 and 32. In this verse here, the ESV, that's the English Standard Version, the NIV, and the King James Version, 1900, I'm specifying even the year 1900, translate wine as wine press in this verse, and in verses such as Revelation 19:15. The word that is translated as liquor, so again, that only occurs one time in the New Testament, and this is one of the reasons that I came here, because it's talking about wine and liquor, and you know, all of the dictionaries, as I begin, they look at this liquor and they will say beer, but that word in the Greek is sikira. Sikira, I'm gonna have the computer pronounce it.
Sikera.
Sikera. Sikara. And the King James Version, King James 1900, the New King James Version, and the English Standard Version translate this word sikara as strong drink. You know, here we got the NASB translating it as liquor, and they're translating it as strong drink. The NIV translates it as fermented drink. Now, this word oinos occurs in verses such as Matthew 9:17, Matthew 27:34, Mark 2:22. And I only mention these verses. I'm not going to read these verses. We're going to read several verses, but I'm not going to read these verses because I don't want to be accused of cherry picking. When I cover Matthew and Mark, you know, we will do these verses. Those verses, at least a couple of them, refer to the wine as talking about putting new wine into old wineskins. And I choose not to address it here and now as it's, as it's talked about in those verses. I want to be looking mostly in Luke, but I say mostly in Luke. I will be reading in some other places from the New Testament also. Let's go and read from Luke 7:33 to 35. For John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, behold, a gluttonous man and a drunkard. Now this word drunkard, the NASB has a footnote that says wine drinker, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom has vindicated us all. This word that's translated as drunkard occurs here and in Matthew 11:19. But now think about this. Again, and think about, as it's talking about wine, is it talking about an alcoholic beverage? Or is it talking about a non-alcoholic beverage, as some say? Well, I'm going to go ahead and give you my conclusion, is that it is talking about an alcoholic beverage. Let me read it again. For John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. Now, I don't know why drinking pure grape juice, in any context, why that would make one act outside of his character. But, they're saying that John, bottom line, they said John was crazy, and he didn't drink wine. He didn't eat bread. The Son of Man has come both eating and drinking. You say, behold, a gluttonous man and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, yet wisdom has vindicated itself. Let's move on to another one. Let's read Romans 14:21. It is good not to eat meat or to drink wine. Again, that's that Greek word oinos, or to do anything by which your brother stumbles. I think I'm used to reading it in another translation which says which causes your brother to stumble. But it's the same thing. In other words, if you're around someone that has a problem with wine, don't pull out all of the wine if you know that it's going to cause that person to stumble. And again, I would venture to say that it's not talking about just pure grape juice. It's talking about a fermented drink here. It's talking about an alcoholic drink. So let's read one more. Let's read Ephesians 5:18. And do not get drunk with wine. Let's see this word drunk. I didn't look. Let me have the computer pronounce it. Methusko. Don't get drunk with wine. I didn't look at other translations. This is Ephesians 5:18. You can go ahead and compare other translations. I encourage you to do that. So it says, "Don't get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit." So again, I would say that it is talking about an alcoholic beverage. So bottom line, as I said, I conclude that at the wedding feast over there in John chapter 2, Jesus took that water and turned it into an alcoholic beverage. But you're not going to just accept something because I say it, and I wouldn't expect you to. The thing that I've been encouraging is that you do your own homework. That you do your own homework. Let's read a couple more. Let's read 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 5:23. No longer drink water exclusively, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. So now here they were using it for medicinal purposes. And let's go over here to Titus 2:3. Older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good. So let's go back over here to John. And, we had come down to verse 9. So as I said, I have concluded, you may conclude differently, that Jesus did, in fact, turn this water into an alcoholic drink. So now let's think about this a little bit more. Let's read verse 9 again. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom, and he said, verse 10, to him, every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. I wanted to just comment on this 10th verse here. The NASB has a little footnote that says, or have become drunk. This raises a question in my mind. Was Jesus, we went and read some verses, was Jesus encouraging people to get drunk? Or, were they at a reveling party, a wedding, where they were out of control? It's hard for me to believe that Jesus did that. Again, the conclusion that I come to is that it's okay to drink wine or have an alcoholic drink. I don't happen to drink wine. I don't drink it because of a health condition. I take blood thinning medication, and wine interacts with the blood thinning medication. So wine and any alcohol. As a matter of fact, if I get a cold, I can't even take NyQuil, the cold medicine, because it has alcohol in it. Not because I'm afraid that I'm going to get drunk and lose control, but because of my medical condition. But it doesn't bother me if someone else has a glass of wine or has a beer or has a cocktail. Doesn't bother me. But now, if I were an alcoholic, and I think this is the thing, again, we've read, some of us, again, in terms of following Jesus, some of us doesn't care. Some of us don't care about whether something may cause someone else to stumble. They really haven't looked at the scripture. And so don't pull out the alcohol around an alcoholic. Don't do it. So this was a shorter lesson. We just dealt with the issue of the wine. In the next lesson, I'm not going to do it now. We're going to deal with the second half of chapter 2, where Jesus cleanses the temple, the first Passover. So I hope that this lesson was beneficial, and I look to see you next time. You take care.